Welcome to the Authors Hour. My name is Fred Zerm, and I represent the Friends of the Chicago Writers Center. We are a volunteer organization whose mission is to promote writing and writers on the institution grounds and beyond by both supporting and supplementing the activities of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We sponsor several events every week. On Sundays at 5 o'clock in the Prose Room on the second floor of this building, writers and listeners 18 years old and above are invited to participate in an open mic session. I think you are all above 18, is that true? On Fridays at 1:15 in the Garden Room on the first floor of this building, we offer an informal critique session. Writers are invited to bring in 10 copies of one single-spaced page of their prose or poetry for feedback guided by John Brantingham, a professional writer who has taught courses at the Writers Center for money, but you get some feedback from him for free. And on Tuesdays, as in today, we have the Authors Hour reading series in which two Chautauqua writers will present their work. I will tell you about our special annual events after our first author read. Books will be for sale and signing after the reading, and we also should have time for a short Q&A, so if you have any questions, try to remember them for the end. Our first reader, Samuel or Skip Halpern, brings a unique perspective to the search for meaning and motivation to all stages of work life, from people just starting a career to mid-career to near or in retirement. His perspective grows out of a diverse set of life experiences and is highly interdisciplinary, interweaving philosophy and psychology, business, investing, and law, politics, theology, and sports, and thinking from both East and West. After graduating from Brown University and the London School of Economics and earning a law degree from the George Washington National Law Center in D.C., he embarked on a long career in investing in law, protecting pension and health benefits for a wide variety of workers, ranging from Broadway stagehands to athletes in Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, and professional tennis, from steel workers and auto workers to teamsters. He is advised with government agencies, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and investment funds sponsored by China, Thailand, Greece, and Sri Lanka, plus Alaska's Inupiat Eskimos above the Arctic Circle. Wide-ranging, I would say. He continues working part-time today as an expert witness and advisor to the NHL Players Association. Many of his experiences, plus extensive world travels, take form as stories in his book, Wellsprings of Work, to help explore meaning and values in our secular capitalist society. The book has been used by Brown University, NYU, the George Washington Law Center, and has been the subject of an interview on NPR affiliate, and has been universally rated 5 stars by readers commenting on Amazon's book page. Skip and his wife Barbara share their time between the Shenandoah Valley in Virginia, where he's very involved with local rural politics, and the greater Washington, D.C. vicinity. He and his wife, plus grown children and not so grown grandchildren, have been Chautauquans for 5 years. Skip.
Thank you, Fred. And thank you all for being here. I hope you can hear me. When I semi-retired about 10 years ago, I paused to ponder what that career had amounted to. Why did I find it fulfilling? And whatever the answers were, would that provide shed any sort of light on retirement, and for that matter, my larger life? And much to my surprise, though I began only for self-understanding, I realized that the tentacles of these answers extended out across life more broadly. Today, I'd like to give you a sense of the overall arc of the book, touching on just excerpts from a few of the dozen chapters. Each one of them explores a different dimension of either the psychology or the spirituality that moved me in my career, ostensibly dry, soulless, or even worse, and move a lot of other people as well across all sorts of careers, all stages of life, from just beginning to mid-career, as Fred said, certainly into retirement. And maybe consciously or unconsciously, you'll see that these have moved you as well. Of the chapters that I'll read, each one begins with a nonfiction episode from the world of investing and lawyering, but each is a springboard for exploring larger ideas about what's going on beneath the surface. The first chapter I'll refer to concerns the drive for respect and recognition. I titled it Warren and Me. In a moment, you'll know why I should have titled it Warren and the Waitress. Maybe in the next edition. Background very quickly: a company called Kaiser Aluminum had entered into a collective bargaining agreement with the United Steelworkers Union, promising retiree benefits for life. However, Kaiser tanked. It went into bankruptcy, couldn't come up with the cash to pay those benefits, but transferred about 60% of its stock to a retiree medical fund. Our firm was selected to manage that, sell it, raise cash to pay for benefits. And that's where the story begins. Hi, Skip. This is Warren. It's about 1 o'clock on Wednesday. Please give me a call. That's Warren, as in Buffett, calling Skip, as in me. I thought this was so cool, I saved this recorded message on my answering machine for about a year. Looking back on that now, I wonder, why did I think it was so great? The so-called Oracle of Omaha, Mr. Buffett, is legendary, an icon in the investment world. Long served as chairman and CEO of Berkshire Hathaway, effectively a publicly traded investment company with an enormous market capitalization. Currently, the 10th largest company in the world. Mr. Buffett's personal net worth was then estimated at more than $100 billion, making him the 6th wealthiest person on the planet. So there he was, tracking down our little firm, and then me as president and head of our team on the Kaiser assignment, and personally calling me. In our first conversation, he was polite but direct and unceremonious. He wanted to purchase in one fell swoop all the Kaiser stock we controlled, and offered a price significantly above the current price listed on NASDAQ. He said he wasn't interested in acquiring less than all the trust shares, because for him, that wouldn't, quote, move the needle, as he put it, given the enormous size of Berkshire's portfolio. I had several conversations with, as he always called himself, Warren, most with him alone on his end of the line and me alone on mine. His position was straightforward, his manner was folksy, he never varied one iota from his opening proposal. I never perceived any palace intrigue. I never suspected a hidden agenda. He was so consistent and unpretentious, I found it disarming. Despite his impression on me, however, we did not find his offer sufficient for a whole host of reasons I won't detail here. We didn't sell him the stock, we held on to it, and as both he and we expected, it significantly rose in value. But regardless, I sure didn't forget the episode. So what was so enthralling about dealing with Mr. Buffett? Why did I save his message? After lots of thought, I think the answer for me applies to innumerable other people as well, across many lines of work. Respect. His calling me was a recognition of my role, validation of my skills. After all, my business partner and I had started our firm from scratch in the mid-1980s with only an idea. And now here I was receiving a call from Warren Buffett. I found this evolution amazing and gratifying. What we privately dream or imagine about ourselves is one thing. When others confirm that self-perception, it becomes more legitimate, more real. So working can deliver validation, whatever your craft, whatever your occupation, whatever you're volunteering. It's natural to wonder whether other people recognize your expertise or appreciate how you perform your work. Do you perform sufficiently well to earn a promotion, at least well enough to earn praise? If so, you're validated. The recognition means that it's not just your imagination. One day you're an apprentice learning stonework, flying as the co-pilot, carrying someone else's briefcase. Over time, as your experience grows, as your skills and confidence develop, you take on the first position. You're recognized as a pro. You gain respect. We see a similar dynamic in other occupations as well. Consider the waitress, whose pride in her skills helps her make it through the night. I'm quoting now from the classic book by Stud Terkel called Working. When I put the plate down, you don't hear a sound. When I pick up the glass, I want it to be just right. When someone says, how come you're just a waitress? I say, don't you think that you deserve being served by me? When a customer told me, you don't have to smile, I'm going to give you a tip anyway, I said, keep it. I wasn't smiling for a tip. Tipping should be done away with. It's like throwing a dog a bone. It makes you feel small. A basic American article of belief is that anyone who works hard and plays by the rules can make it. In that context, making it through work affirms the country's values, especially equality of opportunity, self-reliance, and well-earned respect. Another chapter I'll read illustrates fulfillment and meaning through another psychological, even spiritual drive, and that's connecting with something larger. This episode took place in Beijing, China. I had several trips advising the Chinese government on Western concepts behind investment vehicles and legal principles for a retirement fund to help deal with their enormous demographic time bomb. The one-child policy, as you might know, created this terrible triangle, upside-down pyramid, too few workers supporting too many retirees, so they were trying to deal with that. But my task proved daunting because so many of the concepts were entirely foreign to the Chinese professionals I met, with few notable exceptions. One of the few was the operating chief of the Chinese National Council for Social Security, Mr. Gao Shixing. Gao's grasp of the Western perspective and how, despite formidable obstacles, it might inform the Chinese system was light years ahead of nearly anyone else I encountered in Beijing. He was steeped in the culture, politics, economics, and law of both countries and spoke idiomatic American English. Turned out, this was no accident. He was a graduate of Duke Law School and a Richard Nixon scholar. It also turns out that one legacy of President Nixon's opening with China in the early 70s was an ongoing endowment named in his honor at his alma mater, Duke, designed to educate Chinese students in Western concepts of law. That was Gao's route to the U.S. Not only that, he reportedly became the first Chinese national to pass the New York bar exam. He later worked at Nixon's former law firm in Manhattan, Mudge Rose, and after returning to China was general counsel for the Chinese equivalent of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. With his background and sophistication, Gao clearly understood the Western market-based financial and legal models guiding my perspective and appreciated how tough it was to adapt it to the Chinese context. However, as he once confided in me, dealing with party leaders was, in a phrase I've never forgotten, like banging my head against cotton. Despite, or maybe because of the hospitality and politeness of my primary hosts, I too felt the cotton. With the notable exception of Mr. Gao, little of what I tried to convey seemed to get through to my Chinese hosts. In fact, even my name confounded them. My Chinese counterparts pronounced the S in Samuel as in Sha, S-H, entirely dropped the L, and used the Chinese protocol of treating the Westerner's given name as if that were the surname. The result, I was named with unflagging politeness, Mr. Shamu. During our work sessions, the Chinese legislative staff seemed extremely attentive, but also baffled by fundamental concepts of fiduciary responsibility. As I read my remarks in English, the staff wore headphones for simultaneous translation. My remarks were also translated entirely into Mandarin and printed in a pamphlet for later reference. Well, I slightly overstated the situation. Instead of translated entirely, I should have said almost entirely. Two words remained in English and stuck out on the page like sore thumbs: the cognates fiduciary and fidelity. There were literally no equivalent words in Mandarin. Nevertheless, my work in China amazingly did bear fruit. The State Council subsequently enacted a national law of trust, including several provisions along the lines of what I had advocated, and even more amazing, subsequently, Mandarin speakers coined a word for fiduciary, combining pre-existing characters for responsibility, money, and other people. I mentioned that these episodes are springboards for larger ideas. This next section is called assertive and participatory. Imagine you've made a major scientific discovery that creates two emotions, as Arthur Kessler explained over 50 years ago. One emotion is assertive, the sense that I made the discovery. The other is participatory, feeling that a discovery has been made, fraction of the infinite revealed. The first derives from your sense of power and accomplishment, the second from your sensing a greater whole. The first strengthens the ego, the second feels more cosmic, even transcendent. The assertive is a sense of pride, fulfillment, and accomplishment. The participatory connects you to something beyond yourself. Building on Kessler's insights, I believe many types of work, volunteering, even hobbies, give rise simultaneously to feeling assertive as an individual while also feeling part of something larger. I see this in fields ranging from actuarial science and military service to politics, professional sports, and firefighting. The cliche about working to make a difference is both assertive and participatory. On the one hand is the I, and on the other, a difference. What did you do to make a difference? The answer to the Army's recruitment ad: I became a soldier in the U.S. Army. The message is twofold. I matter because I'm recognized as someone qualified for the team, and simultaneously, I become part of and belong to something bigger: the Army, the country, history. A third drive the book explores is in a chapter called Building a Brighter Future, and there's a subsection called After Oil. Utkavik, formerly known as Barrow, Alaska, is the capital of the North Slope Borough of Alaska. Roughly 300 miles north of the Arctic Circle, 900 miles north of the Alaskan capital of Juneau, Barrow, as I knew it, is the northernmost city in the U.S. and one of the most northerly settlements in the world. Most of the year, it sits amidst unrelieved, flat, gray-white ice and snow along the Arctic Sea. In 1997, when I traveled there, its population was about 4,500, mostly native Inupiat people. Alaska claims at least two so-called permanent funds. One is the enormous statewide fund fueled by taxes on the oil big energy companies drill out of the ground. The other is the North Slopes Permanent Fund, financed by the borough's property taxes, including on the value of improvements like oil rigs and pipelines in or on the surface. By the mid-1990s, the North Slopes Permanent Fund amounted to about $400 million, as I recall, and the borough wanted professional advice on structuring the portfolio and governing it into the future. After a competitive process, we won the business and off we went to Barrow. Permanent Fund had been designed to sustain and improve native villages throughout the borough, a meager population spread across 95,000 square miles. Parenthetically, in the category of accurate or apocryphal, but certainly entertaining, a local told me that if you overlaid the borough's population density onto Manhattan, the Big Apple's head count would total just 9 people. The hope was that the fund's assets would support improved education, social services, healthcare, and local infrastructure into the future. This was part of a larger Inupiat vision to surpass what they deemed a colonial past and assert their cultural and political identity. Hence, Utkavik eventually replaced Barrow. Borough's leaders were forward thinking. They realized that someday the oil would run out, the inflow of dollars would end. How should they manage the portfolio today to prepare for that future depletion? And more to the point, maintain the fund into perpetuity. Thinking far beyond their own lives, they gazed into the distant future. While the oil would prove impermanent, the fund would endure. Perhaps the classic example of building for the future is parenting. This is laying the groundwork now to provide our children and grandchildren a better world, though we won't remain alive to enjoy it. This is Moses leading his people to the edge of the promised land, but never entering it himself. This is taking steps now to achieve political solutions or social improvements for coming generations, like steps to avert catastrophic climate change. This is endowing a foundation, or for that matter, a permanent fund for its good works into perpetuity. The final section I'll read is from a final chapter in the book. It's called The Larger Context. It's subtitled Livelihood, Life, and Death, and a subsection is called An Underlying Drive. Is there some underlying wellspring that feeds not only work, but other dimensions of life as well? Something fundamental that links the various drives and aspirations this book has identified, something that connects work to the wider terrain of living so we see the larger landscape. I'm not alone in seeing that something as the universal human awareness of finitude and our urge to transcend it. Our lives are bounded by the finite, limited and transient, imperfect and mortal. Our sense of finitude operates on levels both earthbound and lofty, in the workaday world and in the sublime. In the realm of work, feeling your own frailties, you may work to master a skill, and that way feel empowered. Unsure of your place in the world, you may work for self-respect and respect from others. Feeling mortality, you may work for a legacy, and that way seek to live on. Feeling alone, you may work to merge with a collective, and in that way gain a larger identity. Feeling the limits in the material world, you may work toward the eternal verities of beauty and truth in the arts and sciences. Knowing that the present is only a passing moment, you may work to build the future. That's the high sign. This wraps it up. Writing a poem, building a pyramid, joining a cause, supporting your family, rooting for your team, fighting for your nation, praying for an afterlife, serving others. In all cases, consciously or not, we seek something beyond our transient, limited self, something more universal and enduring. Thank you.
To say thank you, Shamu, for reading at the Orca Hour. But very good. And I like we have a segue with the mentioning of writing poems, which we'll get to in just a moment. I wanted to go over some of the special events that the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center sponsored. One is the annual Authors Among Us book fair. You just missed that. Okay, that was Sunday, July 13th from 11:30 to 2 on Desert Plaza. Different Chautauqua writers, including these two, were there to sell their books. If you have a book, please be on the lookout for next year's Authors Among Us book fair. I'm going to mention this webpage several times, but you can find out about that and apply for it at chq.org/FCWC for Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. The annual writing contest has not passed us by yet. They close on July 27th. Since you've been on the grounds, even if you just came on for this talk and are then leaving, you are eligible. There are cash prizes. You can learn about how to submit at chq.org/FCWC. On August 4th, in the Hall of Philosophy at 5 o'clock, it's a Monday, the annual Robert Pinsky Favorite Poem Project will take place. At that event, select Chautauquans read their favorite poem, as you can tell from the title. Not BIS, though, okay, something relatively short, and not by you or your husband or whatever, but a poem that's been published out there. You get a chance to read it and briefly explain why it means so much to you. A reminder, we'll have Q&A after our second reader, and that second reader is Clara Silverstein. She is the author of the poetry collection Above the Fall Line, also a memoir, and 5 additional books, ranging from novel to cookbook to the Renaissance woman, okay? Her poems have appeared in journals including Blackbird, Patterson Literary Review, Chautauqua, and at Boston City Hall. She is the former program director of the Chautauqua Writers Center and has led programs at a history museum that was once a stop on the Underground Railroad and now teaches at the Grove Street Center for Creative Writing. Raised in Richmond, Virginia, she lives in Boston with her husband, a lifelong Chautauquan. Come on up, Clara.
Thank you all for being here. Can you hear me? Okay, great. It's an honor to be reading on this porch. And I also want to thank Fred for organizing the Authors Hour every week with the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. And I also want to acknowledge my mentor, Mary Jean Irian. She was the founder of the Writers Center, and she passed away a few years ago. And I dedicated my book to her. And I also want to acknowledge the current staff, led by Kwame Alexander and Stephanie Hunt, and they continue the work she started. So the title of the book is Above the Fall Line. You can't see it probably from everywhere on the porch. The photo is of the James River in Richmond, Virginia, where I was raised. And the fall line refers to a geographical feature in the river. The flow of the river is stopped by a lot of rocks and waterfalls, and boats can't navigate above that. So the metaphoric possibilities were just too good to pass up. Most of the collection looks at history, personal, local, and national, and sometimes all three in the same poem. So I'm going to start with the first poem in the collection, Tourist in My Hometown. When my mother puts my childhood home in Richmond on the market, I return to wander the lawn. Magnolia blossoms littered like crushed coffee cups. At the apartments under construction, in weeds near the Esso station, where my best friend and I wriggled under the chain link fence after men left for the day, tiptoed up plywood stairs to framed rooms where we fingered idle drills, table saws, nail guns, blew smoke rings out roughed-in windows, spied on everything we would leave at the houses below. The wire weave of porch screens, sitting the glow of television, families sparring and guffawing, everything we wanted in the humming edges where the floodlights died away. This next poem is also about Richmond, and it takes on several generations of family and national history there. The importance with 1865 is that was the year that the Civil War ended, and most of you know Richmond was the capital of the Confederacy, and if you lived there, you would not forget this. A lot of things in the city touched on this. After Richmond burned in 1865, my great-grandfather saw the sun rise red as a welt, over charred brick, facade of a ruined mill, windows gaping like eye sockets, above a business district that would be rebuilt to take in my great-grandfather. Black hat in hand at the unveiling of Confederate statues. He put a rebel flag in his lapel to trade with the wounded and the proud, until the Depression bit out his business, sent him off the third-story balcony, and my grandfather, shamefaced, to the tobacco factory, his breath an ember in his throat. In World War II, my mother stirred rationed sugar into her tea, the bag always reused, with monogrammed silver spoons left over from prosperity. At my school, in the asphalt heat of the playground, girls told me, get lost. So I ran past camellia bushes into my mother's yard, overgrown. Every night at the supper table, her face like concrete. Across the Huguenot Bridge, the metal railing where I fell in love with the roar and vertigo of the James River. Past the dance hall where I skulked in the raucousness. After my boyfriend left, wandered Broad Street, chicken and rib joints, vacant lots, where I wove through cones in driver's ed, until I learned enough to speed away. Camshaft churning, everything slammed inside my car, heading north. So here I'm looking at slightly earlier parts of American history. This poem, in this poem, I imagine I'm Pocahontas, who, don't be fooled by the Disney movie. She was a real Native American woman whose father was a tribal leader in Virginia. And she married a white man, John Rolfe, and they went to England and celebrated guests in the 1600s. There's a quote in here from Shakespeare, who was alive at that time as well. And the last image, the crossing I'm referring to, is going back to the U.S. If I were Pocahontas posing for my portrait, England, 1616. This ruff and bodice too tight against my breast. I've already curtsied for King James, already alighted from coaches at mass and entertainment. Hey ho, the wind and the rain, for the rain, it raineth every day. I need to quell impatience while the artist takes my measure. His mouth, a purse, marsh-colored eyes foolish as the feather in the hat he pushed onto my head to hide the dark flood of my hair. He thinks I'm no fair lady, but my neck grows thick as a root, upholds me under this brim, curled like the tip of a wave. On the return crossing, I hasten to make. So now we're back to a bit of Civil War history. Can't get away from it. I imagine Abraham Lincoln visiting Richmond. And here he's with his son, Tad. They came to the city right after it fell in April 1865. And within a month, Lincoln would be assassinated. And within the decade, Tad would die at the age of 18. I imagine Abraham Lincoln visiting Richmond, April 1865. The city fallen, stunned. Ladies in black turn threadbare back to the president, who rushes his Union escort into the Jefferson Davis house, just abandoned, to soldiers who swarm fatigue. Lincoln jams unsteady legs under the desk while his son leans in for the pen, signs his name on a blank sheet flourish on the L, rests one arm light as a scarf on the careworn cloth of his father's collar. The president pleads until grimness takes its customary roost. Outside, ashes rain, smoke sticks in every throat. And here I'm talking about an ancestor who fought for the Confederacy in North Carolina. Ambrotype is a kind of old photograph. Ambrotype. At 17, great-grandpappy Tim, solemn in slouch hat and gray shell jacket in the Carolinas campaign, unsparing path of Sherman. Mustered out, he went back to farming. My grandmother remembered his whiskers, rough as unplaned wood. Now I want to trace his part of my story. I drive south out of snow by a river named Tar. Downtown's a relic from 1910. The road named after the family leads to a trailer park in a parched field. Nobody looks when I step from the car. I'm just leaving anyway, following the line of march to Devil's Racetrack Road, where I scuff the dirt of heritage. So a bit more recent history in the book. This is school desegregation 1970s, which I was part of. I wrote a whole memoir about this experience as one of the white children bused to an African-American school in Richmond. And this poem quotes a line from Marvin Gaye from What's Going On. School desegregation 1970s. Volume dialed up from scratchy transistors on the playground, we dance the hustle. Teachers huddle by the door, too tired of their jobs to reprimand us. Nobody cares what we do as long as we don't fight. Maybe one day we will leave this weed-choked asphalt. You know we've got to find a way. A reckoning is coming. So here's a slightly lighter take on this subject. It is about my fifth grade teacher who was one of the first Black teachers in the school, and she played baseball with us. This is called Power Hitter, and it was the A winner in the Baseball Bard Poetry Contest, which is based in Worcester, Massachusetts. I never thought I'd write about baseball, but here you go. Power Hitter. From the bench, I stopped daydreaming when Miss Stokes stepped up to the plate in her collared dress and heels. I hushed with the other fifth graders. Tapping the bat once on the asphalt, she faced a pitcher just learning the curveball. The fielders moved back as Miss Stokes swung and missed, losing her footing. This is the problem with reading on a phone. Then she hit a fly ball that soared past everyone's glove. We all clapped. Her pinch runner dashed like she did in gym class. But what was the hurry? Miss Stokes pushed back her glasses and smiled in a way she never did in class. When she kept her brown face blotted with powder, her voice clipped, sent me out in the hall if I doodled in the textbook, adding mustaches to the out-of-date faces of the first U.S. president. Who cared if George Washington had false teeth? I wanted to read about Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, each with 3,000 hits and counting. Miss Stokes had to play by the book, but when she batted, I glimpsed where I wanted to go. And I'm going to end with a couple newer poems. This one has to do with Holocaust history. And are people familiar with stumbling stones or Stolpersteine? Okay, they are blocks in the sidewalk metal plaques that commemorate Jews who lived in certain buildings before the Holocaust. It says who lived there and when and where they were deported, and sometimes what also happened to them. This is in my grandmother's ancestral village, Stumbling Stone, Bad Kissingen, Germany. On my knees, I use my right forefinger to trace each letter in 3 bronze memorial plaques outside the former family butcher shop on Bachstrasse. I never knew Amelie, Sophie, Sabine, though they share my grandmother's last name. All deported to Theresienstadt in 1942. 6 silver teaspoons, the last of their possessions, taken. The eldest at 76, Amelie survived only a few months. Sophie, then Sabine, gone too. I want to break open rooms in stucco walls painted cream, stomp across floorboards they wore away serving townspeople. Upstairs in windows shrouded by lace curtains, see their final view of the town, its hot springs and healing mineral water, piped into a marble-lined building outfitted with taps. In the cafe, my breath chills while I dissolve like chocolate powder in steamed milk. So after that, I'm going to end with a couple lighter things. Couldn't resist when I heard that when Tupperware was going out of business earlier this year, this is a company founded in Massachusetts that started in the post-war years, and this is an homage to Tupperware. Remember our wonder, our gullibility, when all it took to organize the kitchen was a set of containers made of polyethylene, no longer needed for gas masks, available to us courtesy of Earl Tupper, who patented the burping seal for bowls, cups, and cake carriers. So many variations to samples that we dressed up for demonstrations in someone's living room, exulting in sugar, butter, cooking oil, back on the market after rationing, all put in its place, coffee and wonder flowing, as we dreamed of everything leak-proof in our new subdivision, reliable capsules stacked up, stepping into the future. All right, and this one is very contemporary. Fred mentioned one of the things I've written in cookbooks, and I like to cook and I like to eat, and I'm very tired of hearing advice. The right diet. The only safe place to go now is the farmer's market. Its crates of kale and carrots still muddy from the field, galleons that bristle, and scapes so pungent they stink up the refrigerator. Goodbye to Cheetos, Funyuns, white bread, white rice, anything white except milk, skim of course, or plain yogurt. Even breakfast is suspect, toast dripping with butter and egg, a vessel for cholesterol. Cereal is laden with sugar, even though it's also sprayed with vitamins on its way down the conveyor belt. From now on, it's lean proteins and whole grains, and so much hydration from an insulated bottle that I risk getting wrinkles on my upper lip from so much sipping. Water only, with a slice of lemon for a splurge. Every night, I promise to chop fresh garlic, never mind my breath, and greens. I'll saute these with white meat chicken, each serving the size of a deck of cards, and a baked potato the size of a fist, so I can knock out the processed seed oil and the wine, too. Thank you. also mention both of us have books for sale after this program.
Please raise your hand if you have a question for either or both of our authors. Right here.
I just want to tell you that I'm from Richmond. So I want to talk to you.
We got some reading to do.
Same time period too, so we'll have to talk.
Okay, we have a fellow Richmond native or someone who lives there? Are you a native of Richmond?
I grew up like her. I grew up and then I moved to North Philadelphia.
Okay. We have another question back there.
Think about your process, like do you like when you're visiting these spots, do the homes come to you, or sort of your topics are very interesting and broad, and how do you?
So the question is about process. How do ideas for poems come to you?
So I would say they come in a variety of ways. Sometimes it's like the stumbling stones. That was very powerful. So I knew I wanted to write, but it took me a long time to write that particular poem. It just resonated, and I kept thinking what images could go with that. So that's one way of doing it. Or some of the Confederate history too. What images would go with some of what I observed out in the world. Like I used to play, there's a poem in there about playing in the war trenches that the Confederate soldiers dug out when they were defending Richmond. And I knew I wanted to write about that. But again, what was I going to say exactly? And then some of them, like the Tupperware, that one came more easily. It just struck me as kind of humorous. And what did Tupperware mean to us exactly? So that was a cultural moment. So I'd say, a lot of times there's a lot of reflection, but sometimes it comes more quickly and again, more lighthearted. Another question?
Clara, with your inspiration, does it start visually or does it start verbally?
Good question. The question is whether the inspiration starts visually or verbally. I honestly think it's visually. And then I'll find the words for it because I will be haunted by an image, almost like a snapshot. And then I'll think, what do I want to say about this? So, good question. Yeah. Jill.
I kind of want to follow that subject. When you're working from memory, like, do you keep journals and notes and things, or is it just from memory because you had such specificity for what people from the past said? And that sort of lines up with someone Clara too, like, how much do you hold in memory, and does the research enter into the process?
For me, it was a very iterative process, and in fact, at the very beginning of the process, for writers out there, I think I took a wrong turn, and I had to correct it. Initially, I was thinking strictly in conceptual terms. As my mother would have said, my feet were firmly planted in the air at that point. And I later realized that to firm up my own ideas, help me remember, I had to get really concrete and really specific. And then by forcing myself to do that, the specifics came to me. And I realized that the ideas sprung from these specific situations, or maybe delved down from the situations, because I was trying to get at what was underlying these events. But the key takeaway was by thinking in very specific, concrete terms without the conceptual implication. That was a better starting point. And that helped me recall and helped me lead to the larger observation.
And I think it also was a better sharing point. And you give us a specific thing to relate to. And I'm reminded of that way to the poet, but William Carlos Williams, ideas, but in things.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, I'd like to quote Mary Jean Period, who used to say the poem bubbles from the bottom up rather than the top down. She would say the stuff of the world is what you need to work with, not the large idea. Let the ideas bubble up. So I think it's very similar to what you're saying, just in a poetic form, but being specific is the platform for both of us.
I want to ask you a question, is that, I think that working, and even when you're not thinking about it when you're in a business relationship with somebody and you realize later that some kind of human value gets exchanged in business. And I wonder what I have a son who's now working, and for the last 3 years, he's been working mostly remote. And it worries me because I think this generation, that I think formation of those kind of values and insight are lost when you work remotely. That being in an office with all of the tension and conflict are very good for growth.
Yeah. The question, if I can summarize,
yeah.
You covered a lot of nuance, was in various business settings, the human element, the personal interrelationships inevitably seem to be very core, even if they're not ostensibly key operators.
Right.
And the question was, in that context, to what extent is operating in the digital world, working remotely, Zooming, etc., and not rubbing elbows at the proverbial water cooler, an impediment, especially for people coming up, but also people engaged in business. Now, and I have two contrary views on that. I came to the conclusion, just for self-understanding, that if you're tapping into some of the different, roughly dozen psychological or spiritual drives the book explores, you can get a lot of meaning and interaction with other people just by really being attentive to that, even on Zoom. And I continue to do work today as an expert witness in litigation, and during COVID, and even to some extent now, a lot of the depositions, which are cross-examination by a lawyer or a gang of them, it gets really personal. And I can humor, I can inject humor, I can get personal, I can try to answer the question just in a dry fashion as well, as equally by Zoom, I think, as I can in person. Having said that, I do think you're onto something. I think something nevertheless is lost, even though you can salvage it digitally. That's my takeaway.
Well, what I'm reminded of is the whole phrase of managing by walking around, which I think is harder to do. It's hard to manage by scrolling around, so that kind of random interaction. We have time for one last question if somebody has one. No, in that case, let's thank Clara and Chris. There's a few announcements about upcoming events, and then I'll let you go. Thursday, July 17th at 3:30 in the Hall of Philosophy, Elizabeth Camarillo Gutierrez will speak about her memoir, My Side of the River. Tomorrow, right here on the porch at 12:15, the Young Readers Program will be discussing They Call Me Guero by David Bowles. Friday, right here, the Summer on the Steps series continues here at 12:15. There will be brief readings from work generated during this week's Writers Center workshops, as well as the reading of the community poem. If you haven't gotten Wind to Bat, as the name indicates, it's a poem written by the community. Different people contribute phrases, words, lines, and then the literary arts staff selects and puts it into one poem. This week's poem, I think the phrase you're supposed to use someplace in the poem is "Hand on Heart, I Pledge," and it's supposed to be about if the United States disappeared, what would its legacy be? You can either go to poetry.chq.org and keep on saying continue. It'll take you to the makerspace, and you might contribute and share. And there's a way of sharing it, or drop by the Poetry Makerspace, physically in Holquist, where the old CLSC veranda, if you're an old timer, used to be. Please, consider joining the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center, helping us with events such as the Author's Hour, the Writing Contest, Robert Pinsky's Favorite Poem Project, the Book Fair, the Open Mic, the Informal Critique. Next week, if you're around, please join us as two fine poets will be reading. Pat Owen from a recent book, The Crossroads, and Kill Townsend from both her new book, The Songs of Leaves, and older works, Thunder in My Name and The Color of Shadows. Videos of this talk will be available on YouTube. If you search for Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center channel, you can get this reading and all readings from 2020. We all went virtual to today. Thank you for being here. I hope to see you at other Friends events. Take care.
No, let me just, yeah, yeah.